The question right now that everyone has is whether or not Bitcoin is in a bear market and what's going to happen to altcoins, because ultimately speaking, we've still been waiting for this altcoin season that up to this point has not happened. Now, we have a big week upcoming. A lot of data is going to be released in the markets. We're going to get a little bit more clarity, and we're going to give you guys all the details you need to know to navigate this week in crypto, as well as thoughts as to what is going to happen in the future. So if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and let's talk about the future of crypto. First and foremost, before we get into the data you absolutely need to know for this week, I want you guys to go in the comment section below and let me know, where do you think Bitcoin is in the current cycle? You've obviously all seen this psychology of a market cheat sheet. We have, time and time again explored this throughout the bull market for Bitcoin. We've also tried to explore this for altcoins. In my opinion, altcoins are likely still in, a disbelief stage because nobody believes in altcoins doing well. And ever since 2021, altcoins have bled against Bitcoin. But if we talk about Bitcoin specifically, I want your guys' opinion. Are you thinking we are in, the complacency stage? Do you think that the October high of 126,000 was the euphoria we had this market? Let me know where you guys believe we are in the comment section below. I'm interested in seeing your guys' opinions. Now, as I'm making this video, it's Sunday afternoon and the markets are not looking too great. If you look at Bitcoin right this second, it is currently at 94,200. Now, what this means, the price isn't too relevant, but what's relevant is that Bitcoin is likely going to have the first weekly candle close below the 50-week moving average. And time again, we've been, very focused on this over the last few weeks because we've seen a massive depression on Bitcoin ever since the October 6th all-time high. So from $126,000 to where we currently are, Bitcoin is down 25%. Now, although we've seen many dumps in previous bull markets of, 25, 30, even 40%. We have never lost the 50-week moving average as support. And it is likely that just in a few hours, Bitcoin is going to have its first weekly candle close below that 50-week moving average, which is the first time that this is going to happen since it really broke out in, February of 2023. So ever since February of 2023, which is almost, 3 years up to this point, we have not seen Bitcoin's price close below this blue line. You can see that this blue line goes up and up and up, and Bitcoin, although touches it, it never actually closes below. And this is going to be the first time in several years that this weekly candle close is likely going to go and close below it. So what this means is that for, the last 2.5+ years, we've had this support level being the 50-week moving average act as support every time Bitcoin consolidated and went lower and had those, 20, 30, 40% drops. That was the support holding it and allowing it to go up higher. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's the absolute end for Bitcoin. I do believe that, Bitcoin is going to continue in future bull markets, future cycles. It's likely going to continue higher and higher and higher, just like it has since inception. Now, what I do believe is going to happen is because Bitcoin has fallen below this 50-week moving average, there's likely going to be more sell pressure now that it's lost that key level of support. Now, because Bitcoin is losing a key level of support, altcoins are ultimately going to also be impacted. If we take a look at altcoin performance over the last week, we are into the double digits in negative gains for the majority of altcoins. Of course, you have the privacy narrative that is continuing to do phenomenally well with Zeke, with Stark, and others. But the majority of your altcoins, and if we look at the total three, which basically tracks all altcoins, there is a lot of negativity and a lot of sell pressure in altcoins right now. Taking a look at that total 3 charts, well, we are now at about a $900 billion in terms of the entire market cap for altcoins. This is excluding Bitcoin and Ethereum. And we can also see that on this chart, we are losing that 50-week moving average. Now, it's not as important as the Bitcoin supports, but as you can see time and time again during this bull market for, altcoins, because altcoins have ultimately gone up from their bear market lows, they have, almost respected that 50-week moving average as well. Some candle closes below, but ultimately speaking, relating it back to Bitcoin, that is, the king of crypto. And if Bitcoin goes down, altcoins are likely also going to continue going down. Now, it's not all gloom and doom right now. There are still a ton of positive and bullish factors that are happening this week that could change the trajectory of Bitcoin. And as we've said before, we are still, waiting for 2 candle closes below the 50-week moving average on Bitcoin to change the current position of bullishness that we have in the markets. Now, in terms of what's happening this week, there is a ton of data coming out, like I earlier said, and that data is going to be absolutely crucial because we know the US government has been shut down for 43 days, and it was just last week that they reopened. Now, a lot of people expected this reopening to be bullish because they were going to bring back liquidity, better liquidity conditions, and so on and so forth. But last week was the first week of the government being open. And this week, we are getting a ton, and I mean a ton of economic data. So not to bore you with everything that's coming out, but we do have Fed manufacturing data. We have Fed minutes happening on Wednesday. Another very important thing happening Wednesday is the NVIDIA earnings. There is right now about a 7 to 8% implied move upon these earnings. So hopefully we get good earnings because we all know AI, and a lot of people are saying AI is potentially in a bubble right now. So if NVIDIA has better than expected earnings, that's likely going to relieve some of that stress of an AI bubble. But if NVIDIA reports bad earnings or less than expected earnings, which, hasn't happened in a very long time, that could also lead into the AI bubble narrative. So be careful of that. But ultimately speaking, we have a whole lot of data coming out this week that we haven't had in the better part of the last month and a half. Now, if you want to stay up to date with exactly what's happening, I do suggest going on to marketwatch.com. It's a free site. You can literally just go see what's happening on a day-to-day basis so that you are aware and you can see the different forecasts, the period, and the actual numbers as they become available. But like we said, there is a ton of data that is likely going to have a lot of impacts on the stock market as well as the crypto markets, because overall, this data is what economic forecasters need and what the Fed need to make a more rational decision as to what's going to happen with the December rate cuts in that FOMC meeting. So that's a big part of what's happening this week. We are going to get a bunch of data. Now, if you are starting to get very worried in the markets, it's absolutely understandable because the fear and greed index is practically at some of the lowest lows it's ever been. There is a ton of fear in the market. There is a little bit of hopium that I'm going to give you right now. As we know, we have quantitative tightening ending in December. That's still about 2.5 weeks away. There is that FOMC meeting, which potential rate cuts are happening in mid-December. That's again still a month away. But what is currently happening right now is that we have a death cross happening on Bitcoin's price. And I'm going to show you guys some statistics here. I know we've talked a bit about it before, but this death cross happened on Saturday, November 15th, which was just a few days ago. And typically speaking, over the last few death crosses, we've seen a bottom in the market and a massive rally from there. Now, again, there is a caveat to this because when we've had a death cross after a bull market, it has not led to a rally on Bitcoin's price. And if we take a look at these numbers exactly, there is a nice thread by SubuTrade on Twitter that goes into all the details of what has happened since a death cross has happened on Bitcoin ever since 2014. So if you take a look at the 2014, event where the death cross happened, as you remember, 2013 was that bull market, was also, the 4-year cycle for Bitcoin. If you take a look at when the death cross happened, well, about a year ago, you had the price of Bitcoin down about 50%. Now, obviously, the first time it happened, it did rally quite well 3 months into it. But again, a year down the road, we were in a heavy bear market. Now, if we fast forward to 2018, which is, again, the bull market happened in 2017, you can also see that we had a very, very bad next year after that bear market, or after the death cross happened on the price of Bitcoin. But if I give you guys a bullish example of, a death cross actually seeing positive gains after that, we can go back to September 15th, 2015, which is obviously after the 2014 bear market, but you can see that a year later, Bitcoin's price went 164%. Now, if we fast forward in time and you go back to the last 2 events of this death cross, which happened this cycle, if we go back to April 7th, 2025, we've talked about this, in the last videos, we can see that 6 months later, which is basically where we are now, Bitcoin's price had rallied 53%. And similarly, in August of 2024, when this happened, 6 months later, Bitcoin's price was up 58%, and even a year later was up 95%. And I just realized that my face was covering half of the screen, but those are some of the examples for you there. Now, all this means is that when Bitcoin has topped out, which of course is the $1 million question, when the death cross happens, it is a signal that the bear market is looming. And in the other sense, if the death cross happens and Bitcoin hasn't peaked, well, Bitcoin is going to rally and rally quite well. So that is the $1 million question that we're all waiting to answer and see. Nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody can tell you with certainty what's going to happen, which leads me to the next point here. I made a quick poll on, YouTube to ask you guys if you believe in the 4-year cycle or do you believe in liquidity cycles? And most of you have responded that you believe in liquidity cycles. So with that being said, if we take a look at liquidity over these last few cycles, well, in 2013, you had this area of green where the money to supply was growing. You had Bitcoin peaking in 2013. In 2017, you have the very similar thing, very good liquidity conditions, very similar in 2021. And right now, we've not seen the explosion of liquidity in this cycle. So that's why there's the massive debate of whether or not the 4-year cycle or liquidity cycles is what really, makes Bitcoin move. So one could argue that throughout the last 3 years, we've been in a tightening cycle, but Bitcoin has still been able to make new all-time highs and very good all-time highs from the bear market lows. We're talking about 6x from the lows in restrictive liquidity conditions, and that because better liquidity conditions are coming, we are only at the beginning stages of this bull market. Or you could argue that there is that 4-year cycle regardless of liquidity conditions, but liquidity conditions help evidently. But since we are towards the end of this Q4 and the end of the 4-year cycle, well, we may actually be at the point where Bitcoin turns the corner and starts a bear market. May not be as big of a bear market as previous ones, but nonetheless could see more downside pressure. And something that does represent this quite well is the Bitcoin market cycle bottom ROI. So since the peak, if we take a look at the last 3 cycles, we have the current cycle in pink, the 2021 cycle in green, and the 2017 cycle in, orange. And as you can see, this chart seems to have turned the corner, but we have not seen this euphoric phase as we saw in 2017 and 2021. This is a chart coming from Ben Cohen on his ITC or Into the Cryptoverse Premium. He posted that one on Twitter. So If we look at the current conditions for Bitcoin monthly returns, we are seeing absolutely disgusting numbers for November now, although it's only the middle of the month, but it reminds me of like 2018. It also reminds me of 2022, even 2021. After Bitcoin had peaked in October, it went pretty rough for the rest of Q4 and even the first month of 2022. We are, continuing to see Bitcoin struggle at these current prices. So that is something else I am monitoring. And last but not least, what Ben Cohen ends up saying on Twitter is very interesting, because if this weekly candle close below that 50-week moving average, which is likely already happened as you're watching this video, well, the top of October could mark a 60 to 70% chance of it actually being the top. And then he says if a second candle close is below that 50-week moving average, then the likelihood of that October high being the top of the cycle would even continue to be bigger, and that 2026 could bring a bigger reset for Bitcoin. So with all of that being said, there is a lot of data coming out this week that's going to shake up the markets. There's going to be volatility. Hopefully it's good data and not bad data. Then we also have that death cross, which just happened. Typically speaking, we've seen good bounces from the death cross, but when the cycle is over, it continues to fall. That's something to continue monitoring over the next few days and weeks. And of course, if we do get a second weekly candle close, well, the chances of that October high being the high for Bitcoin this cycle does increase. So let me know what you guys believe right now. Altcoins and Bitcoins are all struggling. We are continuing to have the same invalidation criteria as before, so I'm waiting for that second weekly candle close below the 50-week moving average, but let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. And with that being said, make sure you're staying safe in crypto. Don't over leverage yourself, because only invest money that you can't afford to lose. That's the only advice I could give. And with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Peace.